Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is Day 9 Daily number 27, and it is December 1st, 2009, which of course reminds me that I forgot to pay rent today. So I gotta go ahead and do that. For those of you who are curious at all what all the little hubbub was about earlier on, alright, we're synced up right now. Yeah. The whole big deal that was happening at the start was that for some reason my Procaster died, right? It just completely fell apart. So this song, I've actually been listening to this song like all day because it just cracks me up, and I played it right before the cast, but this is like what I felt like, right? I was just like freaking out. I was like, oh my god, why is Procaster not working? It always works. I have 5 minutes. I was doing these things with these exaggerated motions, like looking like, oh, I'm late. You know, I was like freaking out and shit. So I had to like restart my computer. So I'm like trying to get it to boot, but of course then Windows starts telling me I need to install automatic updates, and I'm like, what the fuck? It's not time for automatic updates. Cancel. Bring the viruses on. I need to talk about StarCraft. Oh my god. So I finally got it starting, and it worked. And everything seemed to be going okay. There's a problem with the output, right? There's a huge problem with the sound output. I need to change it to the microphone instead of from the original audio, because otherwise you don't hear anything in the slightest. So at first I was like, oh my god, did I fuck up? But then everything got sorted out. And finally started to calm down. I was like, alright, cool. And now we can begin. We can begin the Day 9 Daily, number 27. And you know what? I almost closed this YouTube video, because when I close the video, it crashes the stream. So I need to go ahead and leave that video open. I'm extra excited today because we are doing your guys' replays. I chose a lucky special 4. The 4 we are going to be doing today are Makami, Bjorn. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the rest of your name, Bjorn, but I think it's like Bjorn Kavins from Team Liquid, Violet with 2 T's from Team Liquid, and Red Storm from Team Liquid. Obviously, they're all from Team Liquid because that's where you sent me the PMs. We're going to be looking at these replays pretty quickly. We're doing 4 today. We're doing 4 replays tomorrow, so definitely tune in to see how things went there. I'm going to go ahead and mute the chat as well. I'm super excited because we have 300 viewers this time. 300 viewers. I normally start at around 180 and things sort of trail up, but clearly there's some excitement going on today already. There's a little bit of audio out of sync, I'm understanding. I'm going to try to see if I can fix that really fast. Hold on just 1 minute. Is it still out of sync? Alright, cool, yeah. There's always a few issues right when I start. I'm glad I didn't have to restart everything, because generally when it boots up, it takes a little bit of time for the audio and the video to sync, and sometimes it gets thrown off a bit. For those of you wondering what that song was at the start where I was freaking out, it's called Hit and Run. I don't remember who composed it, but it was on the Ren and Stimpy soundtrack, if any of you remember that old school game. So yeah, we're going to be going through a bunch of replays today. We're doing 4 more tomorrow. I'm done taking replay submissions. What I actually ended up doing was I used a random number generator to pick 8 of the 60 submissions I got, so hooray, thank you for submitting. Then I went ahead and just read what you wrote, why you wanted to choose it, and only one case that I ended up choosing another one, where someone literally just pasted a replay link to me and I didn't really know anything about it. So I want to address one major thing that each person did, like when they sent me the message, because I mean a lot of players had this big list of questions, but I tried to boil it down to what I thought was the essence of the replay. So in this first replay by Makami, it's on destination. Let's go ahead and switch over to the screen. Here's my replay folder. So we're going to go ahead and boot this up. And Makami is playing Terran in this case. Pretty sure that, yes, Makami. I'm going to be speeding these things up just a little bit because I want to make sure that we don't end up here all day. And actually, I'm a little bit worried. I opened my Chaos Launcher with the Storm plugin. Whoopsie daisies. I'm actually going to go ahead and reboot, because the last thing I want is to have you not know what the replay progress is, because I'm going to be using that replay progress bar quite a bit throughout this, because we can develop timings for things. We can figure out how we need to respond to our opponents in certain ways just by looking at that timer a whole bunch. So on destination, instead of opening up a map preview, let me just reveal the entire map to sort of show that. So let's just drag over here. So ignore this and look at the main screen. The big thing that Protoss has an advantage of is these double bridges. you can plant Dragoons on the other side of him and stop any pushes coming out here. And more importantly, for this Protoss player, with his double bridge, he can position Dragoons down here. And it's very difficult for any early FD pushes, any early 2 factory pushes to come out. So early expanding's pretty safe as Protoss. With Terran, a lot of times it's harder to take a third because Terran has to focus on this one and this one. Or their goal is to take one of these ones, but generally they end up having to take this one a little bit earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on it largely from Makami's point of view. Let me go ahead and lock this mouse so I can start doing things. And okay, I already like the fact that Makami moved down here. That's one of those moves that gets you extra wins. I think it might be a little bit too early. I'm not going to focus too much on this Manor Pylon. It might be a little too early to send this SCV down here to check things out. I would like to do something like send it maybe when I'm building my barracks or maybe when I'm midway through. Because if you send your SCV down here, you stop the probe from building anything. Like literally anything at all. He'll probably even have time to cancel his pylon. What you want is for him to build the gateways and already have his pylon done and then run down here and kill it all off so that way the Protoss players actually lost stuff. If we send it too early, the Protoss player just gets to go on with some normal game plan. So I'm going to go ahead and ignore this sort of thing. Because the thing that Makami wanted to focus on was that he played what he felt was a pretty standard macro game. This is actually kind of cute by Protoss. He felt like he played a pretty standard macro game and that things seemed to be going well, but he couldn't handle how much Protoss was expanding in the late game. And because he wanted that to be the focus, I went ahead and I'm going to be focusing on that. So this usual sort of cute stuff. This is actually pretty good response by Makami. Definitely not overreacting with the SCVs, keeping a lot mining, focusing on these pylons. Protoss is getting way behind, and Makami's still continuing to build with his wall in here. He's not overreacting, he's not building other buildings elsewhere, just staying nice and calm and killing these things off. I mean, ideally you want a little more organization with the SCVs, and little things like this, knowing exactly how many SCVs you need in order to kill these things off, so that way you don't send too many. But this can obviously be a pain in the ass. I'm going to go ahead and skip through this portion of the game. These are the sorts of things that I would have liked to see a refinery a little bit earlier. A lot of times when you're doing this sort of thing where you are under a lot of pressure from any sort of early cheese, you have a tendency to get the gas a little too late. And I mean, like, everyone has a tendency to get a gas a little too late. It's very easy to say, okay, once I'm done holding it off with these Marines and I have all my SCVs going again, now let me hop back on track and continue doing things. So I'm going to go ahead and slow it down to ×2. I watch almost all my replays at ×2. I'm going to be ×4ing through certain portions of this game, but still, I think it's important to watch everything at a slow enough speed. People tend to watch at ×4 and even ×8 their way through things. But I think it's much better to just slow things down a little bit. Already, this is good. This engineering base coming out pretty early. Relative to the factory. Most of the time we're getting that engineering bay a little bit later, but I like the fact that it's early because all this insane stuff just happened right here. Something that might help avoid getting it too early is actually sending out a scout SCV even in the midst of all this. Because right now, I mean, from the Terran's point of view, right now, if we didn't have a good view on what the Protoss was doing, Terran would definitely want to get this engineering bay, especially if he was getting proxied right here and couldn't get any SCVs through. But really, you can send a scouting SCV out way earlier. So what I would think is the advantage that a Terran player gets when all this early stuff happens is that I can send a scout super early and know exactly what my opponent's doing. Because not only is there no gateway in his main, because he built it in my main, but also we know that his tech is almost certainly behind from all this money. So that way we can do some extremely, extremely skewed decisions. So for instance, we probably could have built this command center right out here and then a bunker here while we were getting our gas, long before this factory ended up finishing. Because look, this guy is only just now getting range, given his game plan, and our tank is still coming out about in time. So we could go ahead and expand a little bit earlier. These are the sorts of things to think about in this replay. Again, this is a very unorthodox situation that Makami just entered into. But I think that given the sort of situation, you do always want to make sure that there's something... Whoopsie daisies, my webcam's going crazy. I mean, you want to make sure... This is the slipperiest webcam. I need to duct tape this thing down. Yeah. What you can learn from this game that you can apply to all your other games is how to deal with some weird crisis where you got really pounded apart in the start. This includes proxy gates, gates in the main, proxy robos, all this sorts of things. In this case, I would say, let's make sure I can scout my opponent, and only if I can't do I need to worry about getting these early engineering bays. If I'm in extreme crisis mode, see if I can get a scout out early so I really know what direction he's heading in, what his next transition is. And then I need to worry about an engineering bay a little bit later. So those are the sorts of things I would use to get the advantage of having this thing come out a little bit earlier. The Marines were at the ramp. I would prefer to have a little bit more stuff forced here at the ramp, because we had the tank back here, the landed barracks, and the Marines here. You can do things like just have the barracks float over here with some SCVs to sort of push forward. Everything seems to be going a little bit more standardly. I would like to see guys go back in the gas here, back to 3 a little bit earlier. It was hanging out at 2 a little bit. We're also a little bit high on food. And by the way, this is one of the most, whoopsie daisies, I forgot to hold Alt out here. One of the most normal things whenever you're in crisis management is that you things get bumped apart a little bit, is I guess how I want to put it. Because people have their ideas of their builds, they'll have like 8 depot, 12, or 8 depot, 10 racks, 12 depot, make a refinery, 13, I don't know, whenever. Actually, that's way late, but you get the idea, Those build orders are really easy to follow, up to like 50 or 60 food, some people use them. But when you get thrown off like this is why I like using these relative timings, where you think about how early should I make a supply depot given my food, and given the fact that I'm making a command center. Because right now we have all this extra money, all this extra blah. We would have extra money if we hadn't built that early supply depot. I also just saw the supply pop up yet again. Just building a few too many supply depots, though. That said, everything is pretty normal from Terran's point of view. Now, notice how little I've done from Protoss's point of view. That's because I'm focusing exclusively on looking at things from this Terran player's point of view, right? Terran's pushing out here. He shouldn't have been able to scout. Everything's going normally. But look at this. Protoss is doing this incredibly wacky multiple expand thing. This is actually insane, and likely will result in a lot of losses, but occasionally will give you wins against players who are much better than you. So this is what Makami was talking about when he sent in the replay submission. He was saying, now how do I deal with this sort of thing? The immediate answer is that we need to make sure we are scouting all these expansions along here relentlessly. This is good, the usual sort of adding on of factories. Right now I want to know, from Terran's point of view, what is the purpose of these factories? I'm not necessarily saying they're bad, but I'm saying we need to think about why we're getting these 3 factories early on. A lot of players will get 2 factories and continue to power and then get armories and other things. 3 factories to me seems like some sort of early-ish push. If we stayed on 1 and then suddenly got 4 or 5 factories, that would be a mid-game-ish push that would absolutely punish all these expansions. But right now we're a little bit in the dark as Terran, so we'd like to get some information, check out what's going on. Protoss player seems to be doing a decent job. This is a lot of the times what I check when I'm watching my own replays, is I come back here and say, is my opponent playing badly? Well, his money's low, doesn't seem to have been caught up on his food, and he's continuing to make units right on time. This queuing is very bad by Protoss. Ooh, horrible. We don't want to be doing any of that. This might feel a little bit bumpy, the way that these things got built. Here's something that a lot of players are not going to think about. God, I keep forgetting to hold Alt. Whenever you build factories, try to build your factories so that they finish right when something that's building from another factory finishes. So again, let's pretend we're on one factory and we're making tanks out of it. When do we make our new factories so that they finish right when the tank finishes? So all of a sudden the tank finishes, I go back to build the tank, and I hit T to build the tank, and great, all these other factories just finished. V. So by nature of when we constructed the factories, we've already helped to smooth out our macro. So what's good about this is that it has the correct look of a Terran vs. Protoss game. The money's being low, we're getting the academy at about the right time. I would definitely like to see some scanning with this academy, or excuse me, with these comp stats to know exactly when to push. So for instance, getting a scan here, and maybe trying to scout along these side expansions to really get an idea of what's going, or maybe even just scan here to get a gateway count. It's really important to use early scans to help make decisions that you can use to your advantage. Already we're seeing a money build up. So this is the sort of thing that, again, I like to say, we have another transfer of SCVs. I'm not too sure what these SCVs are transferring for. I would work on just smoothing out these SCV transfers a little bit earlier, so that way we don't have to worry about these things. But notice that from this Terran player's point of view, this is the normal sort of look for Terran versus Protoss, but I guarantee there's just a few little tiny bumps that are getting in the way of things. Oh, I'm sorry. The player actually just messaged me saying that he dropped DTs. Sorry, I wasn't watching my minimap. Hopefully I'll Shift-Tab-Tab. Yeah, I always Shift-Tab-Tab in replays to try to investigate things. There are a few little bumps early that likely would have helped this, helped get just a few more units, those sorts of things. Maybe help get this expansion out earlier. A big thing I'm noticing is that we have this armory coming down, and that timing feels a little bit weird to me. We already have a lot, we have factories that would indicate that we're going to be doing some early push. We're adding on another factory. I do think this could have been built earlier, but then this armory is coming out. This seems like the time to devote our efforts to a big mid-game push, as opposed to starting a mid-game push and then transitioning over to the armory. I mean, armories are great. You obviously want to get upgrades, but it's important to either devote to an attack or devote to powering, because if you do one of these in-between builds where you get a little bit extra powering-wise, you get a little bit extra from adding on these factories for a mid-game push, but then all of a sudden we're getting this expansion. Sometimes it can actually damage your both of what you're doing. The upgrades comes out late, you don't get too many guys. So I would focus, in my eyes, the big goal that Terran should focus on is trying to do this, obviously. This is why I say focus on macro. You see how these vultures went through this area and they died? That's so easy to fix, because you say, man, I really shouldn't run my vultures through the middle. I should maybe run them over here and down here. But if your macro starts to slip, and see, this is quite a bit more money, actually, for both players than they should have. If you have zero money, you start being able to do more things, and it's kind of hard right now. Like, Mikami's doing all this harassment with these vultures, but is it as effective as it could have been? Well, it's hard to tell because we still have more money. Also, I would have liked to see more mines get laid down. It's a very easy thing to have happen when you get into vulture harass. You really want to get into position very well. But planting mines out here is such an unbelievable benefit, even if you can't kill off that many probes. Definitely doing that sort of thing, So I mean, all of this look has about the look that you want to have in a Terran vs. Protoss. I mean, it's macros, getting a little bit behind. We have some inconsistencies in the strategy, but the overall look is correct, which is great news, because this means we just need to flesh some things out. Just need to smooth it out, get macro better, develop an exact timing push. Because remember what I said earlier? I said, hey, look, we have these 3 factories coming down pretty early. I think it was actually these 3. When is this timing push going to happen? And then suddenly, I really haven't seen a timing push, and we're already 13 minutes into the game. So Protoss has already expanded across pretty much the whole map, and it's going to be really hard to deal with that. So I would definitely say one of 2 things should be the focus of Terran right now. Terran should either, in his next game, focus on exactly when this timing push is going to happen, or focus on exactly how to get these upgrades early and to time taking these extra expansions so that he can have some giganto push to kill off everything in the middle of the map. And basically, in that regard, he lets his opponent take all of these expansions. Also, it can never be bad to mine this back out and do vulture harass that way. It can be very hard to squeeze across this path. So, I mean, this push is getting Mikami some ground. And based upon our food counts, this is the usual sort of disparity from Terran and Protoss, like about 100 food to like 125 or so. But notice how much money the Protoss has. If I were Terran and I barely won this game, I would say to myself, wow, I'm doing something wrong, because the Protoss had so much money all game long. And notice how this push isn't quite going so quickly. And here's some other things to note. Look at all these units that are queued up here, that sometimes it can give us the illusion that we have good macro, because it's helping to keep the money down. But really, when you have these queued units, I mean, if we have these queued tanks, what's the issue with building 2 extra factories? These are the sorts of things I'm very, very aggressive with trying to weed out of my play, because I think, yeah, Now, instead of saying, well, what do I do, and trying to answer that vague question, I say, well, what could I do with an extra 200 gas and an extra 300 minerals? Well, I could probably have gotten these upgrades earlier. I could probably be expanding here earlier. Probably could have gotten some more factories earlier. And the answer is always not, what do I do with my money now, but what could I have done earlier so that I have no money right now? And this is like the real dangerous situation to be in for Terran, where you can't quite decide between doing a big push or powering and expanding a bunch, because at this point, the money for Terran's getting a little bit out of control. And what we can easily do is just start a push, say maybe around the 11-minute mark. And then what happens is we move forward, and all of a sudden decision-making with this money becomes way easier. If we have pushed, 4 minutes ago, then this is much easier to defend. This is going to be easier to defend. This is going to be easier to defend. So immediately I know where I can spend some of that money. I'm going to be getting more gas so I can get more factories and all this sorts of things. Just doing something like deciding an exact time to push can help help guide all the rest of your adjustments. So at this stage, it's really difficult for Terran to really do much at all. I mean, that's why I'm speeding up right now. In a lot of my replays, I do this, where I start to identify some mistake I made maybe around the 9, 10, 11-minute mark, and I go, man, I guess that's the thing I want to work on for next game. And, I'm not going to ignore all the rest of this. I'm going to try to watch through, my Protoss opponent, his macro is falling apart, so even if I did win, I would think, man, I really need to do a big adjustment to my strategy. And yeah, we do have the right look. We're getting these upgrades out in time, but this, I think, is... I'm going to go ahead and just exit this replay and do a little bit of commentary on it, because we've been going for about 15 minutes now, and I want to make sure that I get to the other 3 replays that we have today. What I would say is the main goal for Terran, given this replay, is to think, what is my mid-game goal? Begin with the mid-game, and if you want to say something like, do a push, like let's say I go 1 factory, expand, let's just do that, and then let's have, let me get 3 factories earlier. So I'm at 4 factories, and I'm going to push the instant I get 11 tanks. Or I'm going to push the instant Speed and Mines finishes researching from my first factory. And then once you've made this declaration, all of a sudden, what might happen is you try it twice, and you get raped. And you're like, ooh, okay. And you rewatch the replay, and you think, well, I guess my 3 early factories didn't quite get to do much. In that case, let me push out when I have 15 tanks, and then with the rest of my Vulture army. And then you push out and it starts to work. Just making arbitrary declarations of exactly what your goal is and how you're going to time it will help adjust everything properly. Because all the correct elements of Terran vs. Protoss were there. The right factory count, given 2 bases, the fact that we're getting these +1/+1 upgrades at a decent time. But in my eyes, the only real issue that actually, if Makami, if you solve this, you're going to have huge success with a lot of other things. The big issue was a lack of a mid-game plan, which clearly created ambiguity as to when you should be getting these armories, when you should be continuing to push. Because I've actually watched Light do a lot of mid-game pushes in some sneak replays I have in my database. And he's very good at getting, 2 armories and continuing to do the upgrades, but he gets them pretty late because he spends so much of his money on this mid-game push. Alternatively, you could say something like, I tried some mid-game pushings and it sucks, so I'm going to do a flash-style heavy powering and define I'm going to harass with 8 vultures the instant I get 8 vultures in the mid-game. I'm going to expand or start building the command center to take my third when I have exactly 8 tanks. Just create these numbers for yourself, and then you're adjusting those numbers over time. So let's go ahead and check out replay number 2. So this is Bjorn Kavist. What he told me in this game is that it seemed to be a pretty good macro game by both players, given their levels. But the problem he had was that this map is Sin Chupung-Ryeong. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm certain I'm butchering it. And the big issue is that there's all these... I mean, just looking from the mini-map, look at how twisty and windy it is. And there's There's this area behind here. This is actually, now that I look at it, this is an old version of Sim Chupung, but I mean, there's this back door right here. This expansion is really awkward to hold because if I'm up here, I have to walk my troops up to here on the minimap, up to this thing, and then even around more to defend this expansion. And there's more stuff that can hit it from the side. Even the corner expansion is a pain in the ass to hold. So, I mean, there's a lot of obnoxious things that happen. So, I'm hoping that I can spend some time focusing on some of the tactics that are going on here and see if that's the source of it. 9 times out of 10, the biggest issue is macro. So, for instance, oops, I probably should have wished I could turn off that sort of chat. Oh, whoops, sorry, excuse me. Bjorn Kavist is actually the Protoss here. I had Shift-Tab-Tab, which made him green, and it flipped the colors. But immediately, the sort of things I noticed is that this barracks is built way late. This is quite a late barracks, so that's the sort of things I'm concerned about. We have an early gas steal by the Protoss. Also, Protoss sent the scout up here and then came back down. You should time it so that right when your probe gets to the base is right when you can actually build it. So, naturally, I have some issues with some of these early strategies. I mean, we don't need to be getting a forge here at all. This forge really isn't going to help us too much. If you had just done this exact look and gone for the early push with Dragoons and Zealots, you'd have been in a much better situation. We really don't want too many early Zealots. Yeah, see, this is what I like to call trying to do 2 things at once. You can early expand as Protoss, and then get these 2 gates afterwards, or you can get these 2 gates and do some pushing and then expand here after you've gotten like Dragoons and Dragoons with speed. But when you try to do them at the same time, when you have these Zealots coming out here, you end up with a lot of bumpiness. And these sorts of things like the Forge with the cannon, although it will make your expansion 100% totally safe, you're going to be in huge problems once you hit the mid-game. We want to weed out as many of these sorts of things as possible. So I know there are a lot of Protoss players who I'm certain are aware of, early expanding like this and avoiding the forge for a long time. But even then, there's a lot of players who will take this, expand here, and then once they get these 2 bases running, they'll get a forge and they'll build a cannon back here to defend from vulture harass. Even then, I think that's a little bit too early. So we do have the right looks to everything, right? We have the gateways that are going to be making Dragoons, our macros slipping a little bit. I haven't actually seen range get researched. Also, too many Zealots early. The general sort of flow that you have in pretty much every Protoss versus Terran is if you look at your main army, like what's wandering around the middle of the map, you make only Dragoons early on because the Dragoons can help hold off vulture harass and can help hold off early pushes. And then in the mid-game, when you're worried about Terran's big army, you get a ton of speed Zealots. So what I'm seeing in this game is I'm seeing too many Zealots early, because these will actually get crushed until they have speed. These Zealots are going to do very, very little early on. A lot of Dragoons are going to help with those early pushes. So I would like to see the Protoss player do a lot more of this. And we can do early stuff with a Forge. Or, excuse me, when we get our Forge, we can do things like upgrade with it, but I still think the Forge is too early. Getting, again, the right numbers. These are the good numbers. We don't really want to be getting Templar Archives quite so fast. The issue right now is I see too much tech being completed off 2 bases. We ideally want to have at least 3 bases before we complete our tech tree this much. You can obviously do things like Arbiter Rush, but when you're combining like Reavers and Templar Archives is when I start to think you're completing the tech tree just a touch too much. Also, these units for Protoss are fairly passive right now. I would prefer to have observers with these Dragoons moving out and clearing out areas with mines. And again, that's yet another reason why we don't want to have that many Dragoons early on. I'm going to speed things up a little bit here. So here are some other things that we see our macro starting to get high. If we spend this, we're going to have way more opportunities to do even more expanding. Like at this point, we could have expanded here and still had money to add on a bunch more gateways, so we'll be in definitely solid position. And as your macro begins improving, you'll start to realize how much you can actually get away with. Like, I'm certain that, I know that this Protoss player, Bjorn, knows how strong High Templar can be. But if you have good macro, you can get away with skipping High Templar for a very long time until you get these sorts of things up and going. Especially right now, once our money's getting into the thousands, that's sort of like the danger period. And also we have the Terran player who has a ton of money, like 5k, 2.5k. I mean, I hope this isn't a rude thing to say, but I just sincerely hope this replay is not bugged, because that's something I did not think about. If it is bugged, then I will happily commentate this bugged replay. And here's some more stuff, like getting these 2 robotics facilities. This is what I say, becoming a little too addicted to tactics. We can do all sorts of cute things with shuttles and getting a lot of reavers, but there's really no need to do all those tactics. If we're against a Terran of any reasonable caliber, or even actually against this Terran, look, 2 sets of shuttles coming out of these robo-bays really aren't going to be doing too much. So macro really is, in my eyes, the primary thing that needs to be focused on in the early game. So, I mean, if I were, talking directly to you, Bjorn, I would say, let's not worry about our strategy yet. Let's worry about you doing whatever it is you want to do. And I mean, these sorts of attacks, this sort of attack, whether it's a good time to attack in this game or not is irrelevant. The answer is, I have 4,000 minerals as Protoss, and I should have 8 times as many units anyways. So let's not think about what these units can do or what they can't do. Let's think about what this $5,000 worth of units can do or can't do. So what I was trying to say earlier, but I interrupted myself rudely, is that I really need to... I would really focus heavily on macro and not even worry so much about the strategy. Just focus on keeping your money at 0. And then, once you're very good at keeping your money at 0, start worrying more about strategy. I'm increasingly thinking this replay is probably not bugged. I'm so sorry. That is somewhat of a rude thing to say, because honestly, I have a lot of friends who let their money get this high, but part of me is just concerned because I never considered the fact that a replay would be bugged. So I just think that would be hilarious if I was doing all that discussioning action there. But yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to go ahead and times 8 my way through this, but if we have really good macro, then we can start worrying about sorting out our strategies. We can start seeing, man, I really can do a lot more. I can take way more expansions. And seriously, when I say, like, focus exclusively on macroing well, I mean that pretty severely. I mean, ignore your units almost. Just attack, move into his base, and don't even pay attention. Just say, man, I hope my guys are doing well. And glance down at the minimap, and if they're all gone, you say, darn, I need to keep macroing. Just keep macroing, keep expanding. And if you feel like your StarCraft games are getting slightly less fun because you're focusing just on macro and you want to focus on the high strategies and this sort of thing, play BGH. I love playing BGH. BGH is an incredibly good way to focus just on macro. Because in BGH, it doesn't really matter what you do. As long as you have a lot of stuff, you're going to win. And plus, you end up with these hilarious games, these ridiculous comebacks. So that I definitely think would be my key advice, is to focus on macro in every way, shape, and form. And once you can keep your money under 1,000, then you'll be in really good shape. So, I mean, we still have units coming out. Part of the issue right now also for Protoss is that because the Protoss player didn't have good control over the middle, generally we're going to have Protoss units up here and like down here and kind of spread out in this center area. So that way when the Terran push comes down this ridge, we can hit it from this big wide arc out like this. And then we never have to worry about the Terran player doing this. Because at this point, no matter what state the game is in, Terran is in fantastic shape. Especially if Terran can sneak their way up to here. And the reason I say sneak their way up to here is because if they're here, then they don't have to worry about units coming up like this and then beelining straight up north to this expansion. So yes, macro. That really, in my eyes, is one of the key things all the way up to like B- and B+. We have some fun little counterattacking action, and we have a scout. Dude, I commend you, Bjorn. Way to scout it up, man. Show that guy who the boss is. He thinks he can make ground units? Bust the scout out. So I think I'll probably end up leaving this game in just a little bit. I mean, and the reason I'm doing that is to sort of drive the point home that we need to think about when we first messed up in this replay. We don't want to think about, can we make a dramatic comeback here? A lot of times, the mistake that you make in an 18-minute long game and lose happened around 10 or 11 minutes. I'm focusing like back there. So sometimes I'll hit 16 minutes in my 18-minute replay and I'll go, oh, no way I could win. Let's move on to the next one, you know, and I'll just close my replay. So let's go ahead and go on to Violet's strat. Oh my god, I named it too long. Alright, quickly. Oh my god, I need to rename this replay. Alright, quick. Go to the replay folder. Alright, we need some theme music for this. Alright, I need to go to the replay folder. Alright, where's program files? StarCraft! Oh, where is it? God, it's not organized by name, it's organized by date. Why did it do that? Okay, hold on, I gotta arrange by name. Alright, sweet. Wait, do I have StarCraft on this computer? What on earth happened? Oh, there it is. It's in my C folder. What's it doing there? Okay, hold on. Alright. Alright, good. Alright, good. I set it up. Alright, there we go. Much less dramatic. Alright, there we go. There's this replay. And then we just go ahead and boot it normally. Oh my god, that song is so funny. Alright, so Violet was saying to me that he has this idea for a strategy that was inspired from something he saw Testy do. And already I'm liking, right what he said off the bat, the fact that he watched another player do something and is trying to mimic it and adjust it to his own style. That's something I definitely recommend doing. There's no reason you have to sit in a room and think up your own strategies. Just see something you like and mimic it. And what Violet was saying was that he was worried that as he was doing his strategy that it ended up messing up. And he was curious if I have any comments on the strategy of the sort of deviations he's making and how he could have adjusted that. So again, I'm going to say this a million times, but I really need to drive this home. You need to macro in all your games, and I'm certain in every single game, including the games I watch of my own, even when I'm able, to play consistently well at the A level on PG Tour, I still constantly go, oh man, is my macro screwing up? Oh god, that's almost always my first instinct. And that solves way more problems than you'd really think. I mean, actually, just to pause, for a long time, I just couldn't play Zerg vs. Protoss. I was just awful. I did not get Zerg vs. Protoss. I mean, and I was able to get to A- and A on the old PG Tour. Actually A+ on the old PG Tour without actually really knowing how to play Zerg vs. Protoss. But I was really good at making stuff. I had incredible macro, and that just pretty much carried me through. And then I'd always hit good Protoss players who'd smash me back down. And when you looked at my record, I had a 90% win rate in Zerg vs. Terran and a 60 to 70% win rate in Zerg vs. Protoss. It was much, 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 much lower. It was really, really hard for me to do that. And really what I want to illustrate to you is that you can get very, very good just with good macro. And then what was so useful is that when I actually did need to sit down and learn new strategies, I was able to do them much more quickly because I could see when and where I had money or not. So this is the first thing that Violet told me, which is actually funny because Violet is Violet this game. Huzzing! So this seems like a very standard 2-gate. Would like to see these zealots coming out much more timely. I mean, this sort of thing where this guy wasn't building and this one gets queued, I consider that severe with 2-gating. And the reason I use that word severe is I'm not trying to beat Violet up or anything. What I'm really trying to say is that if you can be this harsh with yourself, if you can be like, what, I'm rushing and I'm not building out of this gateway, you can start to improve very quickly. Because here's the most important thing. Your replays are not you. They're not your ego. They're a strategy you tried. It is practice for you. You should be able to look at your replays and go, oh man, I screwed that up. Oof, oh man. And it doesn't mean you suck. It's actually it's a demonstration of how good you're going to be if you can look at your games and make these sorts of adjustments. So we have a 2-gate into early expand. I don't mind the strategy in the slightest, because especially if our opponent 1-gated, we're going to be trying to keep him down quite a bit. Oh, someone messaged me on Skype. Oh, I'm trying to open up Skype. Someone says, I'm grieving because of how I can't load your stream, but you know what? This is how much I dedicate myself to my viewers. I'm actually going to tell him, Strider Doom / Old, and I tell him how to do it. Okay, back to casting. Because I want to make sure that Abdullah can join in the fun. So this, in my eyes, is a bit of a danger period for this 2-gating player. Because the number one thing in his eyes is that if I do 2-gate expand, sure, I get to kind of put a bunch of pressure on my opponent early, but if he gets that +1 range upgrade, then I run the risk of losing my expansion and losing the game fairly quickly on. So I never mind this sort of two-gate stuff. This is great. I love any sort of early pressure in Protoss versus Protoss that focuses a lot on drones. Good response by Blue, pulling those guys off. So let's go back and focus more on Purple and what's going on in his base. I don't mind going cannons here either. This might seem very, 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 very unusual, but really, this is what I would call creative thinking, right? I do think we need to focus on maybe getting gas a little bit earlier, because honestly, even if our opponent has like 5 or 6 Dragoons with range, he can murder these cannons very, very quickly. There's actually a recent Protoss vs. Protoss on Match Point that for the life of me I cannot remember who played in it, but one player built a bunch of cannons at his expansion, and the Dragoons with range walked up and killed it. Naturally, you also need to worry about stuff coming from behind, so what I would say is try to have a handful fewer cannons, like maybe 2, and then get your gas much earlier and your cyber core much earlier. So I'm digging this build. I'm digging the strategy. The main issue I see is just that by not spending our money in the proper ways, we're worried about getting behind. We're worried about losing to a whole bunch of Dragoons like this. Now, here's another thing that Violet mentioned to me in his message, is that he hides a probe here, so that way he can constantly check in as to whether or not his Protoss opponent has made an expansion. I really like that thinking. I think that's very, very, very clever, especially when you're doing something unorthodox like this, where you expect to get contained and you expect not to be able to scout very well. What I would say is that if you do have a probe back here, chilling, checking things out, making sure that this expansion comes at a certain time, is that you know exactly when our opponent could possibly be expanding. So let's say we've done this build a bunch of times, and we're worried about our opponent taking the expansion right now at around 6 minutes and 30 seconds. So 6 minutes and 42 down there. What I would do is I would say, man, given my timing, right when my cybernetics core finishes, I should check to see if the expansion comes up. That's that idea of relative timing. I check what is the timing of what I'm doing here versus what my opponent is doing over here. So when I'm playing, I think, man, my opponent would now be taking an expansion because I know my cybernetics core just finished. Let me check. And then let's actually theorize a little bit more. Let's suppose we're comfortable dealing with that. And the second thing we're worried about, actually, let me go back to the main screen just to make sure I'm very clear on this. So in this case, this Protoss went 2-gate with range and then expanded. Let's say the other thing we're worried about when we do this build is when our opponent goes 2-gate, then Reaver, then expand. What I would also check is the time when that expansion comes when my opponent's going Reaver. Because then let's say that the expansion starts right when Violet begins his Robo Bay. So now we have 2 times that he's checking the expansion. First, when his cybernetics core finishes, he's checking the expansion to see if the Nexus built. And when he starts his robotics facility, he's also checking the expansion to see if a Nexus is building. And if he sees nothing the first time, he says, man, my opponent is either trying to expand after he gets his Robo, or my opponent is doing some sort of very intense one-base strategy. And then, Violet can respond appropriately. And see, right now, Violet is encountering the issues I was saying earlier, where just a few Dragoons with range wreak havoc on these cannon lines. I am really surprised that Violet was able to hold this off. This is an excellent defense. I wouldn't want to demean that defense at all. Really good job with these probes moving around. Now's the time when you want to be transferring a few more probes. Also, we have probes queued. Easy to do in a crisis, but something bad we want to weed out. Good defense, but we shouldn't be in the situation where we even need to do that. We really want to have these Dragoons coming out. We want to have that range coming out early. And this really is something good to do. Get a lot of gateways and range before Robo. Because what we're thinking is, I'm 2-gating and then expanding, and I have to play defensively, and my opponent has the opportunity to build up his own Dragoon army. So what I'm going to do is build way more gateways and try to out-Dragoon him in the mid-game with my superior economy. Exactly the way you want to do it. And I don't even mind researching +1 early, because we got this forge to defend with cannons here. Seems great. I'm really liking Blue's macro. Look how low that money is. Excellent, excellent job. And see, look at that. Building those probes right before they finish. Very impressed with Blue's play this game, even though I'm supposed to be analyzing Violet's play. Or I should say I'm very impressed with his macro, which is just slipping, but okay, now it's going down. Very, very good. And the usual sort of thing. We have a few too many pylons going on here, and I know a lot of that is because Purple lost quite a few Dragoons and Zealots early on. But, again, just something to think about is, was this a result of earlier units that were lost, or was this a result of pylons that I'm building too early? So now I'm starting to really see a stockpiling of money, and I'm thinking, how should we have spent this a little while in the past? We have these Dragoons that popped out right now, but right when we started all the production of the Dragoons, I still have 400 left over. That means I probably could have built an expansion a little earlier. I think these two these two cannons are a little excessive. Maybe building one cannon here, and then having a pylon here. And that way, if you see anything here, you just run the probes away, and the cannon covers them. This cannon seems just a little bit excessive, so these are sorts of things I try to weed out. This gateway placement is a little ugly. I would like to clean that up. I would like to do something like build a pylon here and here, just to give a little less room for Reavers to drop here. Excellent, we have a pylon built here. We can build a pylon, probably not here because it'll get shot. We can build it back here. We can build another pylon right here at the edge and right here. These are other little things I try to think about when I'm doing these types of strategies. Very late robotics facility. In my eyes, if we're getting a Robo Bay this late, we're really doing it just for observers, and we should be getting Zealots with leg speeds, especially if we have this many gateways going on. Still continued aggression from Blue. I'm not sure I like this attack so much. This is actually Purple's play, is exactly the sort of play that will hold off that kind of push. So if I need to stop and just give a theme to what I think Violet should work on, think of all the weird timings you're worried about, and make sure you can list them. Like, I seem to lose when my opponent does A, B, and C. And make sure you can scout with that hidden probe to know if he's doing A, B, or C and how you respond. I'm also noticing a slight lack of an apparent mid-game plan. It seemed like Violet had a very great technique for taking this early expansion, but I didn't see as clear a way to use the expansion. Because, I mean, you don't early expand because an expansion is good. You early expand because you get to do a very special sort of timing push, or you get to take an expansion earlier. Something like that. So if it's something like, I want 4 gateways and I want to expand here, and then I want to get up to 10 gateways with Zealot leg speed and push out when I have 2 Templar. Something like that. Make arbitrary decisions. I mean, I just pulled 2 Templar straight out of my ass. I don't know if that's good or not, but that's something I would try doing this build, and see if it has any effectiveness whatsoever. This push feels a little bit early for Purple as well. And again, I would relate this back to the mid-game push. I mean, we're getting ready to expand to a completely safe location. And yet we've also built all these gateways, and we're only really making Dragoons, and we're kind of just sending, 16 Dragoons all of a sudden. I don't see what this timing takes advantage of, because when you attack, I mean, if you attack early with Dragoons against an opponent's expansion, it's because you think you beat your opponent to range. If you're attacking your opponent with a bunch of Dragoons now, I'm worried as to what the purpose of it is. And I mean, you can do things like, well, I want to kill my opponent, but it's important you know why you can kill your opponent. For instance, a very standard timing in this matchup is right when my Reaver pops out, I go kill my opponent. Our macro's slipping a little bit. We could have macroed during that battle. There wasn't that much macro needed. And already we're seeing that, hey, Purple did have good macro. He's building out of all these things. But we really now need to be adding on a bunch more gateways or have this expansion up. This does need a pylon with a cannon here as well. So that sort of thing is what I'm thinking about. I do really like this opening strategy quite a bit. I think it has a lot of use, a lot of viability to it. 2-gate, pound your opponent apart, and then when he tries to counterattack, you have cannons, and right when he gets a range and a bunch of Dragoons, you already have a high enough Dragoon and Zealot count that you can fend things off appropriately. Excuse me. And the way we get that superior Dragoon Zealot count is by getting 4 gateways when we expand against our opponent's 2 gateways with range. Blue, I sense, has a little bit clearer of a plan of when to be doing things. This timing is very, very well aligned. He has quite a good amount of gateways. He's expanding as he's moving out into the middle, which also gives an opportunity for him to expand here soon. And this is why Archons are just the man in this matchup, because you can rip through Zealots so well. And what we're seeing right now is that Violet got just a few more units early on, and every battle they had thereafter, this Dragoon count continued to grow. So I feel like Blue played, except for right now, I feel like Blue may have played a little bit of a cleaner game than Violet. I think Violet had a very good strategy and got a lot of stuff. What I would say is that Violet, you can win even harder if you just add on a bunch more gateways, because look at this. Queued unit, queued unit, queued unit, queued units, 2 queued units, another queued unit. So right now this is like 200, 300, 400, 500, 600 minerals that you have just hanging out in your gateways, at least, that you could use to add on more gateways and to do more cool stuff with. Don't think of it as, oh, I'm so bad, I didn't macro. Think of it as, wow, there's all this stuff I could do. You could have done the exact same thing you did now and had this expansion up and running. That's a pretty incredible thing to think about. And again, the solution is always not, what can I do with my money now? And instead, what could I have done with that money? Because anytime you put it in the, what could I have done with this money? That means I have everything I could have had right now and more. So, you know, now we're transitioning to Archons and Zealots. Excellent. And now, in my eyes, this is just cleanup for Makami. Makami should probably... Or, we're not watching Makami, excuse me. Violet right here. Violet is doing a lot of... Could be, you know, containing. Could be getting a good concave. Could be expanding here. We're out in the middle, and I don't know why we're out in the middle. Being out in the middle, you just shouldn't do it for the sake of being in the middle. I definitely still think more gateways could be researched. I like the fact that we have these extra upgrades from this forge. That's very awesome. But yeah, I dig this strategy. I'm almost certain it's going to come here and win, so I just zoomed way forward. Violet actually said GG first. Oh, you know what? I think I missed some storm drops. Actually, I'm gonna briefly reopen that replay because I'm a little embarrassed if I watch the storm drops. I think I recall him actually saying to watch for the storm drops there, but while I'm letting this thing go, whether Violet won or not, I think it's important to see how much potential there is in that strategy and how important it is to focus on weeding out all these issues that are going on. By the way, I unfortunately will not have time for questions at the end of this. Probably maybe one or... No, actually, now that I think of it, I do have a meeting in like 3 minutes. And we still have to do another replay, so I'm just going to be late for the meeting. But naturally, I unfortunately cannot take Q&A this time. So hopefully we'll have a little bit more time to do it when I do the casting on Wednesday, because I actually don't have anything scheduled after that, because we actually have a presentation tomorrow. I was focusing a lot on the buildings and the, but not very much on the harassment. Yeah, actually, if we go back here to the screen, we see this big storm drop coming in that apparently kills quite a bunch of probes. Ooh, man, that killed a bunch of stuff. And I mean, that's very easy to have happen when you're doing this big attack. So anytime I'm doing a big attack, I'm doubly aware of the minimap. That's why, again, I like having a pylon here. I like having a thing here. I actually set up timings for myself when I'm doing harassment or doing attacking, where I say to myself, every time I tell my mutas to snipe, I glance at the minimap. Or every time I throw a storm down, I check the minimap. Every time I throw a dark swarm down, I look at the minimap. These sorts of things. I'm going to tell all my units to move, and then I'm going to check the minimap. So I honestly don't think... oh man, another unbelievable storm drop. So I think Purple was not nearly in as bad of a situation as he thought he was. Honestly, you know, that's an entirely avoidable scenario. And because I've lost so many games that way, whoops, that's tomorrow's. So if you saw your name there, it is because you are getting casted tomorrow. Yeah, I guess what I want to say about that is it's very easy to lose to these silly harassment things. So you can set up timings to check things. You know, every time I macro, while I'm macroing, I look at the minimap. That's actually something I do a lot. Every time I macro, I look at the minimap. I also make sure I'm regularly just kind of glancing down there anyways, doing this motion. Actually, I have a little bit easier time following the minimap if I turn my head to look at it, as opposed to just glancing with my eyes, because that definitely helps if I'm in panic mode because I'm full of adrenaline. So let's go ahead and check out this replay. This is Red Storm, the blue player, playing a Terran vs. Protoss. And he just sent me what he calls a standard Protoss vs. Terran, taking advantage of Protoss imbalance. Hip hip hooray. For some reason, I'm worried that he's not the Protoss. I think I actually deleted all the replays there. Well, sure hope he's the Protoss, because I'm going to keep going. I'll actually just watch it from both players' point of view. I don't know why I didn't write that down. Pretty sure... well, I won't think about it too much more. So on this map, we also have the opportunity to do some... there's a little bit bigger of a danger of early pushes because of this nice big fat ramp. So this looks like a very economic 2-gate. We're not doing anything too early. Good job of making sure we're not getting too bumpy with our probes. I mean, we're building probes at the right times. We're building pylons at the right times. And see, look at that timing. This is the sort of timing I'm talking about. This gateway finished right when this Dragoon finished. So look, 2 Dragoons started at almost exactly the same time. And yo, a 2-factory push going down. So there is a little bit more concern of it. And I thought of it in advance. Hey-o. Here's another good thing that Terran's doing. All these are the sorts of little things that you should think of incorporating into your play in order to get just those few extra wins. We float this barracks early because we're going to hang it out here, or maybe out here in this water, or maybe down here in this rubble. And that way we're going to float right up north when our push happens, so we can be a little bit more effective. Would like to see a Robo Bay going down soon, or an expansion. Yeah, you see, at this point, now I'm like, wait a minute, why are we building this Dragoon now? Moreover, we have 200, so we could get a Robo Bay. If this Dragoon wasn't making, we'd have the extra 125 we could, build right there. And then, of course, this is the danger. If you send your barracks out at a bad timing, you just lose it. And that's not something you want to do. Now, this is weird by Terran. Terran went 2-gate, which in my eyes says I'm pushing early. And then looks like he's expanding. That is completely inconsistent. And yeah, way to go in there with those Dragoonies. I mean, I really don't like the position. You don't want a position at the front. You want one here, and then you want one here, and then back here. Or even actually 2 up here, and then 1 back, and then buildings walling right there. And then Dragoons can't run there at all. I actually even like doing this sort of thing, where you siege up on the ramp. So good job by the Protoss doing that sort of thing. I also think that the Protoss should have moved these Dragoons out a little bit earlier, done some magic with them. These Dragoons were hanging in the main for quite a long time, and I don't exactly get why. And then we have the expansion coming out. Make sure you get these things up and running right away. Like, this should have had guys heading there to mine as it was finishing. So, I mean, right now, we can have the illusion that we have good macro right now. We can be saying to ourselves, yeah, well, I'm keeping my money pretty low. I mean, when this next production cycle comes, yeah, look, I mean, my money's at 150. But we didn't have these guys here. There was a few periods of time where we were around 300 or 400, but we weren't spending our money. And if you can actually spend money right there, you'll be blown away at how much more you can do. You'll be like, Jesus, I can actually get 2 extra gateways and still do everything I did before. Yeah, this tank placement is atrocious. Absolutely horrific tank placement. Dear Red Storm, I hope you're not Terran, because I don't mean to bash you, but man, put some tanks up here, land this engineering bay here, and then have the rest of your tanks kind of tucked away there. And especially if you're not sure what your opponent's doing, this turret serves no purpose. Also, because if we have a turret here, here, and then continuing along, we have a turret here, and here, nothing can drop us from the north, but something can drop us from here. So why not just build a turret there and have a complete ring? We don't really want this turret just hanging out there. That's kind of an unusual, awkward placement for it. So in my eyes, Protoss has already won this game. The Terran player devoted all his efforts to doing this to factory, then expand, and only make tanks sort of build. Unless there's this huge push coming very, very soon, I would not be surprised if Terran lost pretty easily. Because, I mean, if you go to factory, and then you expand, your expansion is going to be safe if you go one factory. And your expansion is going to be delayed and still safe if you go to factory. And if you go to factory and you don't expand, and you don't attack, or excuse me, if you go to factory and you don't attack, you know, you're kind of throwing away a potential advantage that you may have had from to factory-ing. That's almost like a good analogy is pooling for defense. You know, it doesn't quite line up right. And see, I also feel this forge is just too early. Like, look at this Protoss army distribution. We should have 2 Dragoons here, or maybe even 2 Dragoons here. We should have a few Dragoons here, and we can have the rest of our Dragoons here with an observer. If we don't want to have our Dragoons here, then, I mean, we can keep all our guys back in our base, but this is just not a key part for our units to be defending. Units should be here, and maybe some here, and definitely units right here. This just seems a little weird of a spot. So we have the tech to arbiters, a very standard sort of thing to be doing at this point. And yeah, also, if we have those units positioned well, we don't need to get this forge that early. So we can actually focus on expanding a little bit more. Macro's getting a little behind there. That's the sort of thing that I'm always looking to keep very, 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 very low. So here comes the Mondo Terran push, but it doesn't have enough vultures. For a Terran push to really be strong, and like hard to break, you need tanks. But if you actually want to push aggressively, you need vultures. Naked tanks aren't going to do anything at all. I mean, they're just going to get walked over by all the units. So we see these tanks move out and have to pull back, and we only now have 4 factories coming out for Terran, and nothing making out of them. So macro is the big theme here. See, now this is the right look I'm seeing. We have Dragoons first and then the flood of Zealots, but really when you're going for Arbiter, you can be getting quite a few more Dragoons and focus a little bit more on getting Zealots once you've taken your 3rd here or here. I don't like this as the 3rd because pushing to here is so easy. So yeah, taking up this expansion and so on and so forth. And definitely when you're doing these Arbiters, taking the side base here after you take this one, and then following it up with this one, I mean, you can get a lot of advantage out of the Terran if you just expand to opposite sides of the map. Yeah, see, I feel like this Dragoon count's a little bit low. It's only like 10 Dragoons, I want to say. I'm actually going to count them. There's 9 Dragoons. 9 Dragoons is pretty low. And also, see, look how many more units we could have had right now. Look at the expansion we could have had extra right now. And this is what I call the right look, but not the right execution. So we have a counterattack going on here by Protoss. This is not necessary at all, actually. I mean, this sort of thing is cute to think about and to incorporate on occasion, but if we had macroed properly, we could have killed this push and then killed the Terran. These sorts of zany counterattacks, I don't tend to think too much of. They feel fantastic at the time. You know, if you're Protoss and you do this counterattack, and man, my opponent can't push me now because I have Arbiters. Oh, I'm so awesome, you know. I mean, that's good thinking by Protoss to kill all these. But I mean, we don't need to worry about doing this sort of counterattack if we have so many units that we can kill the main attack and then kill our opponent. I mean, it might feel a little bit extra dramatic and that sort of thing, but, you know, if you focus on good macro and just solid play, a lot of times your decisions are so easy. You just go bam and you kill stuff. So, yeah, really awesome. I have time for just a few. Questions. Most of these players, yeah, were like D, D minus, D plus, and this sort of thing. Oh, I think someone just told me that Red Storms was the Terran, so my apologies on that one. But yeah, I mean, like, really, day 8, do me a favor and stop spamming. If you have a question, just type it once. But yeah, like, I mean, that early attack, like, or the early 2 factory and then expand is going to be problematic if you lost my train of thought. Sorry. Yeah, that early 2 factory and then expand is going to be a little bit of an issue, both for the expanding and for the later on attacks. You'll actually end up with more units and a better mid-game push if you just do 1 factory expand and that sort of thing-a-ring-a-roo. And a question was, do I do replays where the winner won? Obviously I'm going to do replays where the winner won. Do I do replays where the submitter won, is what I meant to say. Yes, I definitely do those. So I'm going to take Day 8's question because he asked it so many times. He said, the early scout is a given, but when is it good to send out another probe, and even later than that? When you need information. Really, you don't want to just send stuff for the sake of sending stuff. You always want to have a motivation behind doing it. And I think that's the biggest thing. So tomorrow we're also going to be doing some D and C level replays. I'm going to try to do them a little bit slower this time. Because really I want to do things like watch it just from the one player's point of view. I'm going to try to get the races correct this time because I didn't take proper notes and so on and so forth. But even though these might seem less entertaining, mistakes become much more clear when we are watching them at a low level, because we're watching them at a high level, it's all about these big, crazy strategies and these overarching themes. But sometimes at low level, it's really easy to think, it's really easy to see, man, that player just should have built extra units there. Or, man, that player, really should have built that extra pylon and so on and so forth. So, that will sum up Day 9 Daily number 27. Tune in tomorrow. We're going to be doing 4 more replays then. I'll be able to do it a little bit longer that time, so that's probably going to be closer to an hour and 20-minute Day 9 Daily as opposed to the usual hour. I'm not taking any more replay submissions. I've already chosen my 4 for tomorrow. So, yeah, big thanks to everybody. Yes, and that about sums it up. So I'm going to go ahead.